Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement Podcast. Alan, the number one procurement podcast in the world, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. Subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, your favorite podcast of choice, Podcatcher. Is that what you use, Alan?
Podcatcher, that's what I say.
Subscribe there. Just go float all around. Google where to listen and head on there. Today, Alan, we are going to go into business analytics, specifically for procurement folks. So the dashboarding, the how to build it, the why you build it, and how you can use that within your teams. I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side, procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veeck, a procurement geek on the sell side of our street, and I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a little company that we like to call The Summit.
Let's get into it.
All right. So business analytics and procurement, Tom. I thought I'm a very linear thinker. I like to have a roadmap. I like to have the AAA triptych before I hit the road, before I head from Pittsburgh to Columbus or whatever I'm doing. So in this episode on business analytics, and I like the way that this is framed. I like the way that you put this together to frame it more broadly than just spend analytics. Let's open it up to think more broadly. Business analytics across the entire procurement function. We're going to be basically digging into five different ideas around business analytics for procurement. The first is the why. So why are business analytics important in procurement? The second thing we're going to dig into is what data do you actually need? So given that we believe it's important, what do you need to be collecting? And what are the main buckets of data that are really meaningful in the world of procurement? That's number two. Number three is we're going to really start talking about the three ways that you can use business analytics. The first is descriptive, to say, okay, kind of a look backwards. What happened? The second is predictive, where you could say, well, what could happen based upon the data that I see? And the third piece is the fun piece, the prescriptive. What should I do about it? What are my actions? What are my next steps that I should take based upon what I see? So that's the third part, kind of the middle part. The fourth part, we're going to be talking about the three key buckets of data, the big kind of the chunky pieces inside procurement that matter most. So this is where spend analytics shows up. But then you also have, very importantly, data around supplier performance and supplier risk. And finally, the contract. The contract is a treasure trove of data, so digging into the contractual piece. So that's the fourth section. And then finally, in the fifth section, we're going to wrap it up and talk about what do you need to build out your business analytics function inside procurement. So with that, Tommy, let me chuck the ball to you.
Got it. Yeah. So like you said, Alan, I mean, for the way I view a lot of this is kind of the end case, right? What can I get out of having proper data? What can I use it for? And really a lot of it ends up being about credibility and being able to have credibility within not only your job function or your team's function in the department, but just with the C-suite of your organization, having things properly laid out, which requires having the clean data that we'll talk through, is really what ends up making proper decisions and building that credibility within your organization. So that's kind of what we're getting at here. It's not only, hey, numbers on spreadsheets, have a bar chart versus pie chart kind of thing. This is about building credibility and being able to make better decisions as a team within your company. So that's kind of what we're getting at here. It's about managing spend, controlling your suppliers, quality, but then communicating and having folks understand the team's value. So like you had said, it starts with the foundation, right? Every house starts with a good foundation. And I think most companies feel like they have probably an okay foundation of data, but I mean, a lot of stuff doesn't talk. So you might have a procure to pay system, but it's not going to capture everything, right? You might just have your POs in one and then actual payments in another, right? So it's these things that don't lay out properly. So you need to be able to build that and connect that together. And I'd say, I mean, for me in the past, it ends up being somewhat manual, but there's different places you might have data, right? You'll have your spend data, you'll have possibly a supplier master, you'll have your contracts, like you were saying, a possible trove of information there, your different P2P logs, if you're having also like receipts for inventory. And then there's a fifth that we don't always think about, but there's these external feeds that you can link up to, different risk alerts, different market intelligence that you might be able to utilize as part of what we'll talk through a little later. So the data quality and governance is something where it's not all about just having the cool dashboard, right? The right colors, right shades of red or green or blue. It's about having the proper data that can then lead to the story that you're looking to have. And
let me ask a quick question on that one, Tom. So you've
yeah,
worked in a few organizations. Me on the client service side, I've worked with a lot of organizations. How many companies that you've had experience with have actually thought about data quality and governance, specifically governance? And I'm thinking, when I think governance, I think you need to have a person or a team in place that this is their day-to-day job. This is their main core function, is to govern the data, so to speak, make sure it's clean and ready.
yeah. I don't know if anyone generally I think a lot of people think about it. So thought is
Of
different than
course.
action, right? So but like do it well. I don't I believe that for the data that procurement people need, it almost needs to be someone within procurement. So
Yeah.
there's
Oh, for sure.
different folks care about the data differently. So in that sense, probably zero. I think I've gone in and I've had to just almost build out my own. It ends up being like a combination of different sources that then you try and get a unique value, a unique identifier that then you can connect them. So you might have
Yeah.
purchase order, then do VLOOKUPs, and while everyone always jokes and says, "Oh, the Excel and Google Sheets, they're dead," but they're not,
Powerful.
because
No.
life is malleable, right? As is the data that we have to
Mm-hmm.
deal with.
Right on.
So you do need a lot of these connection points. You almost need to have someone, and I'd recommend like someone junior on the team that can really just be a
Yeah.
good thinker is a really good person to start. I did this when I was a junior person. Just build that out. That then, hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, you have like a junior analyst pulling something together. That's a worthwhile return on value.
Oh, it
And
is. It's
return on
huge.
investment.
Yeah, it's huge. I think probably in my experience, I've worked with, let's just call it 50 different clients. I would say it's less than a quarter that have thought
Mm-hmm.
about the governance piece. And, you think about, if you're the chief procurement officer sitting in the big seat and you're building out the mission and the vision for your team, I think that's the appropriate point where you say data and data governance is a huge piece of this. We need to put one butt in one seat to manage that. I like the way you thought about it. And I've run into a couple people inside procurement who are service providers who do this function. Like, they basically day in, day out, they live data. So if you can't afford to put one butt in one seat, at least outsource the kind of the data governance piece to an external provider who could give you a fraction of their time to help you think about working your data, making it better.
Yeah, and it is probably closer to a quarter. Like I say, a little bit in jest is the zero,
Of
but
course. Yeah.
if there's like in a lot of cases, it'll be like the business excellence team, right? And they're kind of as like a piece of their of
Yeah.
what they're doing along with processes. But still, it's one of those things where it's not. You always need your own cut that might not fit there. Um, but yeah, if you can get like the categories and build out some of those categories along with the like three or four tiers of categories along with the proper supplier name, like IBM is always a good example. It could be IBM or I.B.M. Right, and that
Right
doesn't
on.
it doesn't connect properly. So really, it is
Yep.
about trying to figure out what you need, the data sources you have, I should say, and then how you can get them together to get some to get those beginning of insights. But it is a lot of work
Yep.
up front.
Yep.
So then the next piece is then, okay, what I'm going to do some analytics. What am I going to use it for? So like you had said, Alan, there's a bit of the what happened view, a little more past focused historicals. Then there's the predictive, like what might happen, what could happen, and then one that's the assistance layer of what should we do. So for the descriptive, I've done this a few times, either myself or someone on my team, where you end up. It's kind of what we were talking about, where you might have the data, and then you have to start trying to figure out how to present that data. And it is very worthwhile to to have a true we was like within the finance side, you would say like one set of numbers, but like a core database that folks can go to, and whether it's run pivots off of, or if you have Power BI, things of that nature, where you can go and your C-suite could go see those analytics that you would have, and then work in some ability for decision making based upon the data that you have there. So, have you seen good use of these, Alan? Some of this like back looking, spend analytics,
Yeah,
things of that nature.
yeah, I would say, there are some people that are adept at doing this. I think I've become somewhat adept at doing it because this is, in the world of sales, when you're talking to prospective clients and you're trying to find ways you can compel them to take action. What I've found is one of the biggest calls to action is, can you send me an excerpt of your spend data? It doesn't matter how dirty it is or how basic it is, and then either I will or somebody on my team will do some just basic analytics around it to try and dig up how much are we spending with which suppliers and which categories, and are those categories great categories to source? Because then once you have that viewpoint, once you have that kind of prioritized list of, we could run this sourcing project and save these dollars, then you could build a proposal. So I would say I've certainly seen this kind of backwards looking, what happened, who are we spending money with, and then you can turn that into, well, what could happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you continue, this could be a price increase that happens in this category. Well, what should we do about it? Well, we should run some good competitive sourcing events.
Yeah, and exactly, and with that, the turning into the what could happen. So you have the ability to build out your story, right? Of this is
Mm-hmm.
our if you're just starting,
Yep.
is this is our current state. This is where we are. We're using 100 suppliers, and it always end up with that 80-20 rule, like in one way or another. But you have some version of that where you can show for I don't know the software spend. We have all of these suppliers, and they kind of like the next step might be like, and then what do they do? But you then have a view of like, all right, we have 1,000 software suppliers, we have 100 software suppliers, and look at that, we're spending with Zoom, Google, Microsoft Teams. Like these things come out and these stories come out of the overlap. um, and then going into the to your point on the what could happen, you can then build in different, like there's market trends. If you're a materials supplier, so if you're like, call it like commodity materials, or if you're purchasing commodities to then roll into the products you have, there's different indices that you would want to build in so you can budget accordingly, right? It's budget season, so you want to be able to build that in and then look for what may happen. So you're looking at some of the historical trends based upon what you spent previously, and then looking out, maybe you're going to do something, your company's doing something different next year, they're going to double the purchase of something. You can then see and figure out what could happen based on that and start modeling that out. Also, one other good one that's, I mean, a bit of the old school is just inventory management, right? So
Right
being
on.
able to being able to forward look and say, okay, with the future, if we're going to double that space, we're going to need, double the input, and we'll need to order by this day, and just work through things of that nature on the supply chain
Yeah,
side.
yeah, and I would say there are lots of great tools that can ingest that sort of data, and do that kind of automatically for you. It'll observe past patterns and make predictions. So, yeah, having good clean data you can feed to those systems is crucial.
Yeah, and then what the predictions, then the what should we do with it, right? That was our third piece, the prescriptive side of things, of just trying to figure out just what should you do based upon, say, like the cost, the speed, the quality. You can then go into that sense. So example would just be like if shipping times and pricing, um, you might need to switch or move volumes around. So a lot of those like quick movement, especially within the shipping industry or moving things, you have to have international supply chains. You can kind of work through that, and it might be worth investing some dollars to get the proper system there. That won't be the day
Yep.
one, but that's as you build up, then you want to move towards that to the extent that it's important to your business.
Yep.
Yeah. So now we go into the three buckets. So we're full of buckets this episode here, Alan. Full of buckets. Now, now we're
Always
on
three
part
things.
4. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
we have the three buckets, and I think the first one is the one we're the most common within procurement, around spend analytics and savings. So for this one, maybe you want to talk. Have you
Yeah.
seen good versions of this, Alan?
Um, well, certainly I've seen some very interesting versions of this.
Oh, do
So,
tell, do
uh,
tell.
yeah, yeah. So when I said oftentimes when we first interact with prospects, we'll ask them questions about sending us some data excerpts, and we would typically send an Excel file over to them and with a layout of what we'd like to see. And I would say that I like to tell everybody there's a minimum set of data that we need that's super simple. If you can give us a supplier name and a quantity spent with that supplier, that is 80% of the battle. And almost everybody has that in their accounts payable system. But I say also now we can do a better job and a faster job and a more complete job if we could say not just have supplier name and dollars associated with that supplier, but if you can give us an item description, if you can give us a unit price, if you can give us a quantity bought, or if you can give us some idea of category, subcategory, these sorts of things so we can understand what sorts of things are being bought, not just who they're being bought from. We could do a much better job actually providing a good prioritized list of sourcing projects back to them. So, this is we oftentimes send this Excel file, this template Excel file to our clients, asking them for information, and then we undoubtedly, it's like you said, Tom, we have to do a lot of massaging to the data, lots of VLOOKUPs, lots of kind of our own personal procurement experience applied to those different suppliers and different categories to understand what's really possible in the spend data that we see.
Yeah, agreed. And I think having those, if you can get those tiers, like the different levels of categorization, where then you can kind of have an overview of like what a category is with some the different the pieces that make that up. I think that's where stories begin to be told, right? If you
Yep.
have like contingent workforce, and then you have what they're doing, whether it's like professional services or maintenance services, et cetera, and then some of the companies, the major players under that, that's good views. And
Yep.
like equipment,
Yep.
if you could break those things down, MRO supplies is always a big one that folks look
Mm-hmm.
into. So I think those categorizations are key to being able to have that good story to be told.
Yeah, and
The sec
categorization is a whole separate topic. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. Everybody uses different categorizations. Certainly, different industries have different things they need to
Mhm.
categorize. But at its highest level, you can kind of think of direct versus indirect material, and then
Which also
inside
changes, right,
it does
between different companies.
between different companies. So
Yeah.
I think this is another one of those very important things that a governance team can do for you is to outline the most appropriate categorization schema for your data. And you might not get it perfect the first time, but if you get it 80% on the right track, then you can refine it in future versions of it. But this is something everybody needs to think about: is how do we, in what buckets do we put the spend, so that we can think about handing it to a category manager who could actually do something with it. It becomes very important, and I think it's a big part of the governance. Now, I would also say this spend analytics thing, the reason why at the outset of this podcast, Tom, I said, thank you for helping us to think more broadly about business analytics, not just spend analytics. But I think this spend analytics is where most procurement teams stop. They kind of say,
Certainly.
I got to look at my spend. It's the next two elements that you're going to dig into now, which is supplier performance and risk, and then the contracts piece. Most people don't even get there. So I think these next couple you're going to dig into are hugely important.
Yeah, and it's not easy, right? Because I think a lot of it ends up being these feedback loops too. And to your point of like governance, it's like who's going to capture it and where are you going to capture it? And I think a lot of folks don't have that set up, and it begins with the prioritization. Is it important, right? Are these things important? Are you going to do anything because you're on whatever GCP or AWS for your cloud? Yeah, you might want to capture something, but it's not going to be the same type of detail that you might be measuring quality into a good or a piece of equipment, $100,000 equipment that you're going to sell, right? There's different levels and different quality issues and different points of quality that you have to measure. So I think those type things end up being those next layers. But yeah, there should be a version of a scorecard that you can have folks ranked against.
Mm-hmm.
A higher level, I'd say, Alan, is like you should be checking their financial health. So this is something that a lot of companies can just you can outsource this. There's plenty,
Right.
like just Google it.
Yep.
But there's plenty of of companies and organizations with 2 letters or 3 letters that do this. So, and then there's geopolitical risk. Also, that's a third-party data source, and these are things that you can connect into certain systems. But even if you're not going to connect them in, you can always just have as part of your process. If you're going to set up a new vendor, you're going to run them through some version of a review before you bring them in. Because financial health of a main supplier, I've seen strong negotiators put companies out of business because they didn't know financial health. I've seen it more than once. And it's quite sad because you end up being such a large portion of their income and their revenues that you end up putting them out of business. So you can only push people so hard in some cases, actually, right? Like there is a limit on a balance sheet and on a financial statement that folks go under when they can't pay their bills. So these are types of things that it might not even be you. They might just be heavily leveraged elsewise. And they, just maybe not running their business well. These are things that you need to know so you're not putting your own company at risk.
Yep.
So that's that one. And then the last one we have here, Alan, and I think you have some experience with some of these too, which is the contracts. So let's say I have contracts and process here, but I think really the contracts is the right bucket. And this is just what you have in your contract, and then also how you're utilizing your contract and measuring against your contract. So in some cases you might be putting things in through your P2P system, but there's the looking back at it and seeing the pricing right, making sure things are checked, and things of that nature.
Yeah, this is, I would say 80% of the work we do at Summit today is contracts management. And so a good contracts process doesn't just involve authoring and negotiating a contract and then kind of uploading it to a CLM, but there's a metadata takeoff that you kind of get this higher level metadata that tells you what's in the contract. So you can understand, okay, what are payment terms? What are the prices that we've negotiated? What are, all of the kind of high level elements that come out of a contract. And then you're able to look across them all and make sure that you're not leaving money on the table. This is an area where, as we've talked about in many of our previous podcasts, AI is making a huge swing. So the ability to dig deep into these contracts, which are a morass of words, oftentimes legal words, an AI can simplify a lot of that. And I like I was on a call just yesterday with a client, and we'd done some digging in one of their big contracts with one of their MRO suppliers, and found that they were missing about $25,000 worth of rebates last year, and equally as much this year, if not more, because they were failing to live up to their payment terms. So it's as soon as we fix that, the comment that came from our champion at this client, he said, $25,000, that's half an FTE. I could hire more people if we just go out and pick up that money that's laying on the street.
That's true. Yeah, and I wrote down here, volume discounts is one that you always end up it comes up. You're like, oh, geez, like let me make sure there's. Those are things that should be more actively managed and should be captured somewhere, right? So if you gain 1.5% or 3% after the first 500,000 or $1 million, whatever those tiers may be, you should have it somewhere within a dashboard that tracks those volume discounts. So if you could tie it all together, all the better. So those are, again, leaving money on the table.
Yeah. I have one client of mine, not a huge client, but they negotiated kind of surprisingly volume discounts into our contract. And we triggered one of those volume discounts. So I reached out to him and said, hey, we've been asking for a quarterly management review, basic supplier relationship function that their procurement team is supposed to be implying on putting on us, not us putting on them. And they just kept kicking the can down the road on the quarterly management review. So I didn't have a forum to tell them that they've got a rebate coming to them if they just ask for it.
So let's set this up and I'll bring the check when I meet with you.
No kidding. So it is the point that you were making is it's not good enough just to negotiate it into a contract. You got to put a process and a kind of a governance in place that's going to trigger that once you hit it.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of procurement teams are at least viewed as guilty of stopping the care after this contract signature. The back end management is not. You can't put something on the business that you negotiate into the contract that they have no idea about. There's a lot of folks just trying to get their job done, and they're using the contract you put in place, but they need that support of, to your point of like the legal jargon. No one's reading through the bullets of how they should need to get that 3% back, other than the person putting it in there. So, so yeah, it's a benefit to the team that's doing it to be able to then manage these better. So then, Alan, let's wrap all this up, right? We talked a lot about it.
Bring us home, Tommy.
How do you do it? How do you do it, Alan? so if you're there's two sides of this, right? If you're just starting from scratch or if you're reigniting something, but we're going to put together a 5-point plan here, Alan, for folks. So on how do you implement a procurement dashboard or a spend analytics or business analytics? So the first is define what you want, define the objectives you're looking to hit. So we all love typing things out. You end up with 20 bullet points, but you can only have 3 to 5, Alan. It always stops at 5, no more than 5 of anything that matter to your business. So you'd be able to find many different things that folks would recommend you do, but your business would demand you its own 5. So it could be like the spend itself. That's one you would want, but like if there's risk incidents, quality incidents, the percent of managed spend versus not managed spend. These are all things you need to think about, or folks need to think about as they're putting together, what will this look like? So then number 2 is you want to prioritize. You want to start somewhere. So you want to pick 1 to 2 use cases and then map those KPIs. So you want something, make it short term. You want within 90 days, you could have something stood up. And if you have a more analyst on your team, that should be somebody you can lean on to help with this. Step 3, fix the data. So you've prioritized your case, you have those objectives, now you want to fix the data. Just focusing first on that small subset. So I'd recommend, having something that is most important to the business. It's always the best place to start, max importance. You won't be able to do the whole database. So start trying. I've tried it. I've done it. It takes a while. You want to just clean the data that's needed for that use case to show the value. Or have someone on your team do that to show the value and guide them along. Then you want to build measure. There's some lightweight tools. Excel is always a great place to start. If you have Power BI included with your Microsoft license, use that. If you have the Google version or whatever other version, just use those. And you can always figure out if this is working super well, then is there something that might be better? But start somewhere and then measure if people are actually using it. And then number 5 is expand. Use those upfront quick wins, that 90 days to prove out how it works or how it doesn't, but how it works for advanced analytics. And then you can figure out what tools you might need later. So define the objectives, figure out the use cases, fix the data and what data, build, measure something, and then ask for the budget or show your work and show the value.
I love that. That is spot on. And the words you use to describe this are great. Start small. Don't overscope this thing because you can overscope it to the point where you kill it. Start small. Go after the data that matters most. So that's why I like to use this example of the spend data. As dirty as it might be, you can still apply some pretty simple logic to it and come away with some quick wins, some sourcing projects that you can go do. You can run tomorrow or next month or the month after that to generate some savings. And from those, you can say, this all happened when we looked at this dirty data and turned it into reasonably good information. But wouldn't we love to have a governance process in place, a person or a team or an outsourced service provider who could come in and help us take these data to the next level. And then you start to conquer bigger hills inside that data. There's lots of service providers that can help with this, but I think, again, your messaging, with an Excel spreadsheet and some smarts, you can start yourself today.
For sure.
Good. Well, what a fun topic to talk about. Kind of a foundational topic in the world of procurement. On behalf of your humble hosts here at Rebuild Procurement Podcast, we are Tommy Finn, the guy who puts the Finn in finance and business analytics, and me, your OG in procurement, Alan Veeck, hoping you will make this a powerful and productive week in procurement. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.
Rebuild.